The day you realize your one more year isn't 1 year at all. It's the first domino in a 5-year chain. Everything turns into a crime scene. A quiet crime, no sirens, just stolen summers, stolen mornings, stolen knees that used to climb mountains without negotiation. In this story, we're going back to a factory in 1963 where a pension promise shattered overnight. And we'll trace the same pattern into your modern retirement plan: who profits when you delay, and how your fear gets priced like a product. If you want more stories like this, hit subscribe right now, because by the end, you'll see exactly how the safe choice can become the most expensive trap of your life. South Bend, Indiana, 1963. Cold air that bites your knuckles through work gloves. The men arrive like they always do. Boots on concrete, lunch pails swinging, confidence built from repetition. Studebaker wasn't just a job, it was a rhythm. A badge, a promise wrapped in steel. For years, management sold a simple bargain: give us your best decades, and we'll protect your last ones. They called it a pension. The men called it security. And security is the kind of word people trust enough to stop asking questions. I want you to notice something. Nobody panics about a future problem when next week's paycheck still clears. That's the first trick in every long con. The pension wasn't a line on a wall, it was a pool of money, quietly supposed to fill over time. But a pool can look full from far away. Up close, you see the drain. The missing funds weren't missing like a lost wallet, they were missing like a slow leak in the dark. And leaks are always most dangerous when people refuse to turn on the light. Here's the part that makes this story modern. The men in South Bend weren't lazy, careless, or ignorant. They were loyal. They did what society told them was honorable. They stayed when younger workers left for better offers because they believed the promise was real. Loyalty felt like a strategy. It felt like investing in a stable stock. But sometimes stability is just a story you're paying for with years you can't get back. A few months later, the plant closed. Not gradually, not politely. Closed like a door slamming in a hallway you thought would always stay lit. That guaranteed future, the one they had been mentally spending on peaceful mornings and pain-free walks, turned into a fraction. Some got partial benefits, some got almost nothing. The younger ones were hit hardest, because the timeline that was supposed to protect them became the timeline that buried them. And the men who had been trained to endure suddenly discovered endurance doesn't pay when the rules change overnight. When I first read about Studebaker, I thought it was a history lesson. Then I realized it's a blueprint. The blueprint is simple. Step 1. Promise people safety later. Step 2. Quietly underfund the promise because the consequences are delayed. Step 3. When the crisis hits, pay the people closest to power first. Step 4. Hand everyone else a smaller future and call it unfortunate. The true villain isn't a single executive. It's the incentive structure that makes later a place where responsibility goes to sleep. Now jump to the present. You're not walking into a factory, you're walking into an office. A store, a truck, a classroom, a hospital, somewhere you no longer love but still rely on. You're 61, 62, and everyone around you reacts in the same two useless ways. The polite lie, good for you. Staying active, the judgment, why didn't you plan better? Both miss the point. Most people working past 60 aren't addicted to work. They're negotiating with fear, because fear feels like data when you don't have clarity. And clarity is rare because it's uncomfortable. The math most people do is simple: income, bills, savings, repeat. The math they avoid is the kind that makes your throat tighten. How many healthy weeks do you have left? Not total weeks alive, healthy weeks where your body still listens. Where a plane ride doesn't demand 2 days of recovery. Where your brain doesn't fog over like a windshield at 2 p.m. 1,000 healthy weeks sounds generous until you translate it into summers and birthdays. Then it starts to feel like a countdown. Here's the twist that turns this from a self-help video into an investigation. That feeling of, I'm not allowed to stop, is profitable. Not always in a cartoonish, evil villain way, but profitable in the way a casino profits from uncertainty. The longer you keep working, the more taxes you pay. The longer your employer gets experienced labor that often produces more than it costs. And the longer your money stays inside financial accounts where somebody charges a percentage just for standing nearby. A 1% fee doesn't sound like a mugging, but over time, it behaves like one. So the case file splits into 2 suspects, and you need to know which one is holding the weapon. Suspect A: you truly don't have enough to retire safely. Suspect B: you have enough. But you don't feel like you have enough, and that moving finish line keeps you working for just one more year. They look identical from the outside, but they are not the same crime. In the next part, I'm going to show you the 3 numbers that expose which suspect is real, and the hidden pattern that turns one more year into a habit you can't quit. Before we go deeper, I want to name the trap in plain language. After 59, working longer can stop being a strategy and become a sedative. It quiets the fear for another 12 months. It delays hard decisions. It postpones the moment you have to look at your life and admit what you actually want. And sedatives are addictive because they work until they cost you something you can't replace. Here's the uncomfortable rule shift that most people never accept. When you're 25, time is abundant and money is scarce. When you're 60, time is scarce and money, if you've done anything right at all, is at least partially built. Yet people keep making decisions as if time is infinite. They'll optimize for a bigger portfolio number while ignoring the invisible account called usable years. The one that only makes withdrawals and never accepts deposits. That's why retirement age is the wrong obsession. Age is a calendar number. Conditions are math. You can retire at 61 with paid housing, controlled spending, and a portfolio built for withdrawals and be safer than a person who works to 68 with no plan and a portfolio still built like a sports car, fast, aggressive, benchmark chasing. Retirement isn't a race. It's like flying a plane with one engine out. The goal isn't speed. The goal is staying in the air. Most people don't crash because they lack money. They crash because they lack structure. The most dangerous lie in modern finance is that not touching your investments is automatically responsible. It sounds noble, it sounds disciplined, but if you keep working while your body sends warning signs, you're not avoiding risk, you're relocating it from the market into your health, your relationships, and your ability to enjoy what you saved. That's the kind of risk that doesn't show up on a chart. Now we get to the 3-number framework, the flashlight for this whole case. If you're working past 59, you should know these 3 numbers like you know your birthday. Number 1. Your monthly baseline spend. Not the dream budget, not the once we travel more budget. The baseline, the amount that keeps your life running without panic. Guaranteed income floor, Social Security, pension if real, reliable net rental income, an annuity you already own. Anything that still shows up even if markets throw a tantrum. Number 3. Your gap, baseline spend minus guaranteed income. Once you know the gap, retirement stops being a fog and becomes a solvable equation. Because you're no longer asking, is my portfolio enough? A question that produces nothing but anxiety. You're asking, what withdrawal system covers my gap with high probability? That's a question you can engineer. Confidence doesn't come from a bigger number. Confidence comes from knowing the gap and knowing the levers. Let's make it real with round numbers. Say your baseline spend is $5 a month. Housing, food, insurance, the boring essentials. And say your guaranteed income floor is $3 a month. That leaves a gap of $2 a month, $24 a year. Now you can stop guessing. If you want a conservative withdrawal rate, you might aim around 4% or lower depending on flexibility. To generate $24 a year at 4%, you need roughly $600 designed for withdrawals. Not a fantasy portfolio, a distribution portfolio. Different sport, different rules. This is where the real villain walks into frame. Sequence of returns risk. Fancy term, brutal reality. If the market gets ugly early in retirement, withdrawals hurt more because you're pulling money out while prices are down. Imagine trying to refill a bucket while someone else is dumping water out. Early losses plus withdrawals can create a spiral. The market drop isn't what ruins you. The timing is. Most people respond to that fear by saying, fine, I'll work longer. But that's like fixing a leaky roof by sleeping in a different room. The real solution is structure, specifically, what I call a bridge bucket. A bridge bucket is cash and short-term bonds and safe assets that cover the first couple years of your gap so you're not forced to sell stocks after a crash. It's not stuffing money under a mattress. It's buying yourself time, because time is the real asset. And the reason people resist this is psychological. Cash feels like missing out. They see stocks returning more and feel foolish holding safety. But after 59, the game is not maximizing returns. The game is minimizing catastrophic outcomes. You don't buy homeowners insurance because it makes money. You buy it because the downside is unacceptable. A bridge bucket is the same logic, insurance against the first punch. In the next part, I'm going to show you how fear gets monetized through fees and expert language, and why a 1% fee can quietly steal a retirement year the way a pickpocket steals a wallet. Let's talk about the quiet leak, fees. Because fees don't feel like theft. They feel like background noise, like a subscription you forgot you signed up for. A 1% fee sounds harmless until you attach it to a portfolio instead of a coffee. If you have $500 invested, 1% is $5 every year forever, and the true damage isn't the $5, it's the compounding you never get to keep. Think of it like this: if your money could grow at 7% before fees and you lose 1% to management costs, you didn't just lose 1%, you lost a chunk of the final mountain. Over 20 years, that can become 6 figures of difference. Over 30, it can become a life change. This is why institutions love the work longer narrative. It keeps your asset base growing, and their fee is a percentage of the base. Bigger pile, bigger toll. Here's how the fear economy stays invisible. It distracts you with uncertain risks and hides the certain one. Market risk is uncertain. Fees are guaranteed, but they'll show you dramatic crash charts. Headline horror, complex simulations, then skip the simple chart that shows what 1% does over decades. Because the crash chart scares you into compliance, the fee chart empowers you into action, and empowerment is bad for business. Now, you might think this is all too cynical, like I'm implying everyone is out to get you. I'm not. I'm saying incentives are real, and adults get hurt when they ignore them. A financial advisor can help. Insurance can matter. Complex strategies can be useful. But if you don't understand the basic mechanics, gap, runway, fees, structure, then you're not deciding. You're drifting. And drifting is how you wake up at 66 still working with no clear reason besides momentum. This is where the case gets psychological. Because money isn't the only chain. Identity is. For a lot of people, especially men who spent decades being useful, work is not just income. It's a role, it's structure, it's a scoreboard, it's the place where you know how to win. Retirement is open-ended, and open-ended can feel like falling. No deadlines, no praise, no good job, no uniform that signals who you are. So people do something strange. They create a financial excuse to avoid the emotional work. They say, I can't retire yet, but what they mean is, I don't know who I am without this. Nobody says it out loud because it sounds fragile, but it's common, and it's powerful, and when identity is the real issue, no amount of extra money fixes it, because the finish line keeps moving. Remember that survey pattern the narrator mentioned? Even high net worth households often say they'd need roughly twice what they already have to feel comfortable. 5 million feels like it should be enough, until your brain whispers 10. 10 feels like it should be enough, until it whispers 20. The number is never the finish line. The feeling is, and financial products are sold to feelings. This is how 1 more year becomes 5. Year 1 buys relief. Then your brain updates the standard and manufactures a new emergency. Year 2 buys relief again. Then the world provides fresh reasons, healthcare headlines, market volatility, a neighbor's bad story, a news segment designed to terrify. And by year 3, you're not choosing, you're continuing. By year 4, you've built a routine around delaying. By year 5, the delay feels like your identity. Now let's return to Studebaker. Because the factory story is the cleanest version of the pattern. The men delayed leaving because they believed the promise would hold. They built their entire future around an external guarantee. But the promise was only as strong as the incentives behind it. Underfunding a pension is a way to borrow from the future without calling it debt. It's invisible debt, and invisible debt is always someone else's problem, until it becomes yours. The modern equivalent of that pension promise is this sentence: if I just work 2 more years, I'll be safe. It sounds responsible. It sounds adult. But safe from what? Safe from market volatility? Safe from healthcare costs? Safe from boredom? Safe from the possibility of regretting a decision? Those are different fears pretending to be one. In the next part, I'm going to break your situation into 4 buckets, so you can identify which fear is actually driving the wheel. And I'll show you the practical audit that takes 1 hour and exposes the invisible taxes stealing your freedom. Here are the 4 buckets. 4 motives that look identical from the outside, but lead to completely different outcomes. Bucket 1. You truly need the income to cover your baseline spend. Bucket 2. You could cover the baseline, but you're terrified of market risk. Bucket 3. You could cover the baseline, but you don't know how to transition psychologically. Bucket 4. You're working because you genuinely like it and it gives you meaning. Only bucket 4 is fine without changes. Buckets 1 through 3 demand a plan, or they'll quietly turn into a life sentence. Most people assume they're bucket 1. It feels noble, almost heroic. I'm doing what I have to do. But bucket 1 is smaller than people think. A lot of people are actually bucket 2 or 3, because uncertainty feels identical to insufficiency when your brain is running on fear. That's why the first job is not earning more. The first job is classification. You can't solve the wrong problem. Let's handle bucket 2 first, market fear, because it's the most common modern trap. The narrator used a housing analogy for a reason. It's easier to feel it in your bones when it's a house instead of a spreadsheet. Imagine a $300 house with a $150 mortgage. You feel solid, then you add a $50 home equity loan. Still fine, until prices drop 20%. Suddenly equity collapses. Your daily life didn't change, but your position did. That's retirement without a bridge bucket. A market drop plus withdrawals is a leveraged hit. The fix is not, work longer. The fix is, stop forcing your portfolio to fund your first punch. That's what the bridge bucket does. 2 to 3 years of your gap covered in safer assets so you don't sell growth assets at the worst time. This isn't about being conservative forever. It's about building a shock absorber so your plan doesn't break when reality behaves like reality. Now bucket 1. The people who truly need income. If that's you, the advice isn't, retire anyway. The advice is, stop selling your time at the worst exchange rate. After 59, a year of labor is an asset you're spending. You should evaluate it like an investment. What is the after-tax, after-expense return of 1 more year? Not your salary, your keep amount. Say you earn $100. Great headline number, but you don't keep it. Taxes take a chunk, payroll taxes, maybe state taxes, then commuting, meals, stress spending, and the small costs that multiply when you're tired. Maybe you keep $70. Now divide by time. Full-time work is roughly 2.000 hours a year. Not counting mental load, that's $35 an hour. The question becomes, is $35 an hour a good trade for your healthiest year? Here's the sharp edge. After 59, your financial future becomes a health future. If 5 more years of income costs you sleep, movement, and relationships, you might increase future medical costs and reduce the ability to enjoy what you saved. That's the most tragic trade, buying money with the exact capacity you wanted money for. The older you get, the more your best investment return is actually lower stress and higher health. This is why shrinking the gap is underrated power. Every $1 a month you remove from baseline spend is not giving up. It's like deleting a giant future savings requirement. Because a smaller gap means you need a smaller portfolio to cover it. People obsess over earning more because it feels glamorous. But shrinking the gap is often faster, more reliable, and less exhausting. Now bucket 3, identity. This is the one people hide behind math. They say, I need more money. But secretly what they need is a new story about who they are. Work gives them structure. Retirement threatens to expose silence. So they keep the job as a shield. If this is you, the plan is not a bigger portfolio. The plan is designing your days before the days design you. Now we hit the friction point nobody wants to say out loud, healthcare. Many people keep working because of employer insurance. That's real, but the villain here is not insurance, it's the unknown. People assume it's impossible without ever getting real quotes. Checking marketplaces, examining subsidies, or exploring spouse plans. And that's how an unknown becomes a prison. You don't trade years of life for a guess. You trade years for numbers. And if you don't have numbers, you're being played by fog. In the next part, we'll do the 1-hour audit, fees, concentration, runway, tax drag, and then calculate the 1 more year number that reveals whether you're 1 year away or 5 years away, and whether that finish line is real or just fear wearing a calculator mask. Here's the 1-hour audit, the kind that doesn't feel motivational, but changes your life because it kills uncertainty. Open every account you plan to live on, 401k, IRA, brokerage, any pension statements, any annuity paperwork, anything with a balance that makes you feel either hopeful or sick. You're not hunting perfection, you're hunting hidden levers. There are 4 categories, and each one is a suspect. Suspect 1. Your all-in cost. Not the fund expense ratio alone. Not the advisor fee alone. All in. That means each fund's expense ratio plus any advisor percentage plus any plan administration fee inside the employer plan. Add them. People avoid this because it's tedious and because the number feels like an insult. But ignorance is expensive. If you're paying 1.5% all in, you're on a treadmill. If you're paying 0.5% or less, you're at least not bleeding as fast. Ellipspect 2. Concentration risk. Most people think they're diversified because they own multiple funds with different names. But labels lie. Funds overlap. If your top 10 holdings are basically the same across multiple funds, you're not diversified, you're duplicated. And concentration risk is the kind that feels fine until it doesn't. It's the risk that waits politely, then arrives all at once. Ellipspect 3. Your cash runway for the gap. Not, how much cash do I have, in abstract. How many months of your gap can you cover without selling stocks? Because the gap is the problem you're solving. If the answer is a couple weeks, you're exposed. If the answer is a couple years, you're protected. This single number often determines whether you can retire into volatility without crawling back to work. Suspect 4. Tax drag. Taxes are one of the few levers you can actually control, and most people treat them like weather. Are you holding assets in the wrong place? Are you generating unnecessary taxable distributions? Are you walking toward required distributions later that could shove you into higher brackets? These aren't tiny details after 59. They can decide whether enough stays enough. Once you have those 4, you do one calculation that cuts through the drama, your 1 more year number. Take the amount you believe you still need before you can retire. Subtract what you already have. That's the remaining pile you're chasing. Now divide by what you can realistically save per year after taxes in real life. The result isn't a prophecy. It's a mirror. If the answer is 1 year, you're not trapped, you're close. If the answer is 5 years, you're making a 5-year bet with your health. But here's the part that turns the knife. Ask yourself whether it's truly 5 years. Or 5 years plus you'll still feel nervous. Because if your problem is psychological, bucket 2 or 3, then the finish line will move the moment you approach it. This is the moment the case file reveals the system's motive. The world likes you working. Your employer likes you producing. The tax system likes you generating taxable income. The financial industry likes your money staying inside accounts. And the fear economy likes you believing safety is always 1 more purchase away. 1 more year away. 1 more complicated product away. Fear is not just an emotion here. It's a business model. And the business model survives through 3 distractions. First, they talk in probabilities and jargon so you feel too small to question them. Second, they inflate your needs by blending baseline and luxury into a single budget that makes retirement look impossible. Third, they keep your eyes locked on market volatility so you don't notice the guaranteed drain, fees, taxes, and the slow theft of time. Here's the mental shift that separates a trapped worker from a free one. You don't retire when you hit a number. You retire when you hit a combination of number, structure, and mindset. Number. Your gap is covered by a sustainable withdrawal plan. Structure. You have a bridge bucket for early market risk and a real healthcare plan. Mindset. You accept that perfect certainty doesn't exist, and you stop trying to buy certainty with years of your life. Next, we're going to return to the most brutal tax of all, regret, and show why the $94, lost time, idea isn't just a catchy title. It's the hidden invoice most people don't open until it's too late. Regret is the final tax because it charges you in a currency you can't refinance. You can tighten a budget, rebalance a portfolio, even recover from a bad market year. But you can't call your 62-year-old niece and ask for a refund. That's why the title number, $94, hits so hard. It isn't saying your time is literally priced by an accountant. It's saying the system quietly converts your remaining good years into a bill you pay without noticing. Here's the way to understand it like an investor and a detective at the same time, after 60. 1 more year is not 1 unit of time. It's a leverage trade, because the year you're selling is not an average year. It's often one of the last years where health is flexible, energy is recoverable, and your body still agrees to spontaneous plans. If you treat that year like a normal commodity, you'll accept a terrible exchange rate and call it responsibility. A $94 idea is basically an opportunity cost audit, wearing a scary headline. Take what you actually keep from 1 more year of work after tax. After commuting, after the little costs that appear when you're tired, meals out, convenience purchases, stress spending, and compare it to what that year could have bought in health, relationships, and freedom. Most people never do this comparison because it feels almost immoral to admit that time might be worth more than money. But after 60, pretending otherwise is how you end up rich in numbers and poor in life. I've seen this up close. Not in a dramatic Hollywood way, worse. In a boring way. A guy I'll call Martin, 62, used to say he was just doing one more year. He said it every January like a ritual. His portfolio was fine, his gap was coverable, but he didn't have a bridge bucket. And he didn't have a plan for his days. So he kept working to avoid both risks, market risk and identity risk. One morning he texted his friend group that he'd join a hiking trip next year. He said it casually, that's how it happens. Next year never arrives the way you think it will. Because time doesn't travel in a straight line at that age. It starts to compress. A small injury takes longer. A cold becomes a week becomes a month. And while you're waiting to feel normal, the world keeps taking withdrawals from your healthy week account. Martin didn't lose his money. He lost momentum. And once you lose momentum after 60, you don't get it back by trying harder. You get it back by structuring your life so you're not bleeding it every day. That's why I call it a fear economy and not just anxiety. Anxiety sounds personal. Fear economy sounds like a system. Because it is. The system doesn't need you to be broke. It only needs you to be uncertain. Uncertainty keeps you working. Uncertainty keeps you paying fees. Uncertainty keeps you buying complexity. And complexity is profitable because it makes you feel like you need an interpreter just to live your own life. Studebaker men learned this the violent way. Their promise collapsed fast enough to feel like betrayal. Your modern promise collapses slower. Which is why it's more dangerous. The modern promise doesn't say, we'll cut your pension. It says, keep going and you'll be safe. It sounds kinder, but it can steal more. Because it steals without creating a single dramatic moment that forces you to wake up. Here's the uncomfortable part. A lot of retirees don't run out of money. They run out of courage. They underspend. They hoard. They keep living like a storm is always tomorrow. They die with most of their money intact not because they planned brilliantly, but because fear stayed employed after they quit. Which means if you're delaying retirement because you're afraid you'll run out, there's a real chance you're trading your best years for money you won't even allow yourself to use. This is where the $94 becomes symbolic. It's the invoice for a year you could have spent living, but instead spent buying a feeling that never arrives. You don't need perfect certainty to retire. You need a defensible plan and the willingness to accept that life is probabilistic. The people who wait for certainty end up working until their body makes the decision for them. And the body is not a negotiator. It's a judge. So imagine the closing scene of this chapter like a detective laying evidence on a table. Gap. Known or unknown. Runway. Weeks or years. Fees. Invisible tax or controlled cost. Bridge bucket. Absent or built. Identity plan. Blank page or direction. When those pieces are missing, one more year is not prudence, it's drift. And drift is how a person wakes up at 66 with a bigger portfolio and a smaller life. In the next part, we'll turn this into a glide path, how to reduce work without jumping off a cliff, and how to make the difference between working at 61 as power versus working at 61 as a cage. People think retirement is a cliff. One day you work, the next day you vanish into silence. That mental image is why they panic and delay. But retirement is rarely a cliff. It can be a glide path, if you design it. The goal isn't to stop working. The goal is to stop being trapped. There's a difference between choosing to work and needing to work. And that difference is a plan. The glide path starts with a simple negotiation most people never attempt. Reduce intensity before you reduce identity. Instead of quitting cold, you shift to lower stress income, consulting, part-time, contract work, teaching, mentoring, anything that trades experience for flexibility instead of trading health for a salary. This isn't settling. This is converting your most valuable asset, skill, into time. Here's why that matters financially. After 59, a small amount of income can replace a huge amount of portfolio stress. If your gap is $24 a year and you earn even $1 a month from low-stress work, you cut the gap in half. That's not just a comfort move. That's a structural move. It reduces withdrawals, reduces sequence risk, and often makes the bridge bucket last longer. It turns your portfolio from lifeboat into support system. The second move on the glide path is building your bridge bucket with intention. Not random cash that happens to exist. but a designed runway, 2 to 3 years of the gap in safer assets. Plus a separate emergency buffer for true surprises. The bridge bucket is not there to make you rich. It's there to keep you free when the market gets violent early. It buys you the right to ignore headlines. The third move is the one that feels small but changes everything. Separate baseline from luxury. Baseline is, keep life running without panic. Luxury is, extra travel, gifts, upgrades. When you blur them, retirement looks impossible because you're trying to fund a fantasy permanently. When you separate them, retirement becomes manageable because you can flex luxury up or down without threatening survival. Flexibility is the most underrated retirement asset. Return to the villain's tactics so you can see them coming. If someone shows you a retirement plan that treats your highest spending version of yourself as the default, they're not planning, they're anchoring. Anchoring makes the number bigger. Bigger numbers keep you working. Bigger numbers keep your money parked in accounts. And parked money generates fees. This is not paranoia, this is incentive math. The fourth move is the fee and concentration cleanse. Not because you should obsess over pennies, but because fees are a guaranteed leak and concentration is a delayed explosion. Lower fees don't just improve returns, they shorten your one more year number. Diversification doesn't just look responsible, it prevents one ugly sector or one employer stock from turning retirement into an emergency job hunt. And now the identity piece. The one everyone pretends is optional. If work has been your scoreboard, you need a new one. Not a perfect purpose, just a direction, a schedule, a reason to wake up that isn't a meeting invite. People who retire well don't just have a withdrawal plan, they have a day plan. They have movement built in. They have social contact built in. They have something that makes them feel useful without needing a boss to certify it. This is where you give yourself permission. Because the world won't. The world benefits when you keep showing up. Nobody is going to hand you a certificate that says, you may now enjoy the time you saved. You have to decide that your life is not a spreadsheet problem alone. Perfect certainty does not exist. The only question is whether you'll keep paying for certainty with years you can't replace. So let's close the file the way a detective closes a case, with the pattern written in plain ink. If you don't know your baseline spend, your income floor, and your gap, you will confuse fear with fact. If you don't build a bridge bucket, you will let sequence risk bully you into working longer. If you don't audit fees, you will pay a lifetime tax you never agreed to. And if you don't design identity, you will keep a job as a mask even when the money says you can leave. The Studebaker men trusted a promise and paid for it. Your promise is one more year. Don't trust it, build the structure, and make sure the last good years of your life are spent living, not negotiating with fear.